Hi, and good evening. So we've saved the best for last. It's money. And what I want to talk to you about first, though, is this is interactive, too. So we are going to be running interactive polls throughout this session because these guys want to know what you think. So please go on to www.slido, which is SLI, and then .do. And if you enter the code 923400, you are then also going to be able to share your opinions as we go throughout the session. So please do come and get involved. So this is our fourth and final session of day one. And we have 4 panelists here to talk to you about using your pound to protect the planet. While it's true that government action is critical to reducing the efforts of climate change, it's also incredibly important to act on an individual level. So in this session, we'll be discussing the challenges that arise as the private sector mobilizes behind climate change. Our speakers for this session aim to empower you to use your money to make the change the planet needs via sustainable investing. I'd like you to give a warm welcome to our first panelist, Hughie Clark. Huggy is a partner of Foresight in the retail sales. With over 20 years' experience, is responsible for sales and marketing within the retail customer base and for developing customer satisfaction across Foresight. Next, we have Nick. Nick is partner of Foresight Capital Management and also the lead fund manager for FP Foresight Global Real Infrastructure Fund. Nick is responsible for investment decisions, fund management, and the growth of Foresight's open-ended fund business. Mark Brennan is also a fund manager with Foresight and lead manager of the FP Foresight UK Infrastructure Income Fund and the FP Foresight Sustainable Real Estate Securities Fund. And then finally, we welcome Jacinta Dillon, partnership manager of Make My Money Matter, an organization that inspires people to be proud of their pensions and believes that your pension should be aligned with your values. Let's hear a round of applause for our speakers.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Goes without saying, these are concerning times. On track for 2.7 degree increase in temperature, increasing floods, droughts, and environmental disasters, and looking like something like 700 million people displaced by 2030. The scale of the challenge and the capital required to address it is unprecedented, as are the dangers if we don't do anything about it. What we hope to do today is provide a bit of encouragement and a bit of hope that actually everyone in this room and everyone outside it can make a huge difference using the pound in their pocket. Might not be immediately clear how that will work, but hopefully by the end of this session, some of that will become more apparent. As has been trailed, I am your host today. I'm Huggy Clark. I am a partner in the retail sales team and heavily involved in Foresight's sustainable efforts. I have three. I was supposed to have 2, and then we stuck one on the end. So I have 3 excellent panelists today. They have had a small trail, but I'll give them a slightly longer one. The first is Nick Scullion. Nick, please say hi.
Yeah, thanks. So Nick Scullion, I'm a partner at Foresight Group, and as was mentioned, I'm the lead manager on the Global Real Infrastructure Fund. In that fund, we're looking to invest into the exact type of technologies and assets that are at the forefront of the climate transition. We're looking for socially relevant and environmentally relevant solutions. So I spend most of my time engaging with companies, but also speaking to investors about how their pound can matter.
Thanks, Nick. And Mark?
Hi, yes, I'm Mark Brennan, a close colleague of Nick's and a partner at Foresight Capital Management. I'm primarily an investor, and I manage 2 of our funds where I look globally at infrastructure, renewable energy, real estate companies, which as well as delivering financial returns to investors are also having an impact on a host of important sustainability considerations. And that's my primary focus within Foresight.
Thanks, Mark. And last but by no means least, our rose between 2 thorns, Jacinta. Please say hello.
Okay. I'm Jacinta Dillon. I'm the Partnerships Manager at Make My Money Matter. And for those of you who may have or may have not heard about us, Make My Money Matter is a campaign that was co-founded by Richard Curtis, who you may very well know from Love Actually and Notting Hill and all of those lovely movies we all watched too many times. And the campaign is helping create a world in which we all know where our money is invested and in which we all know about the power of our money, and in which the trillions invested through our pensions, through our savings, and through our banks are helping tackle the climate emergency, not fuel the fire. And I could go on for ages and talk about all of this, but I think we have a video somewhere, and if technology helps, we can show you why the campaign exists and what we're trying to do.
It actually never occurred to me before that my pension could be something that would create change.
So that's the dream, yeah. Tell me about it.
I would wonder why I hadn't been told about it already.
It doesn't sound like it can or should work.
I think most people don't know what their pension's investing in.
It'd be good to know more about the companies that my pension is being invested in, whether they're doing good in the world.
Who are they? Who are they run by? What are they doing? Where are they?
What? Invest in these?
You're reading it's like a list of horror. Making weapons and ammunition. It's a no-go.
Cigarette companies, coal mines, oil companies, gambling. No way.
I feel like something better could be done with my money. Oh, there you go. That is a stunning list of good things. If my pension went to these things, that would be a wonderful, wonderful thing.
Social housing, infrastructure like schools and hospital.
I would definitely want my money to be invested in building wind farms, tackling climate change.
And companies that treat their workers well. This is my kind of list.
And I, as a kind of customer, can feel, first of all, better about where my money is going, but also you would assume that those pensions would do actually quite well, probably make more money ultimately.
Responsible investing is investing in companies which look after their workforce, look after the environment, and have a kind of a long-term sustainable view about the world and their company.
It would make me feel better in some small way that the things that I believe in, the things that I think are important and are important to me are being reflected in how my money is being used.
I would probably go so far as to say I would increase my pension contributions.
Yeah, I'm going to go make some calls and I'll leave here.
Now I'm going to run back home and check. Understanding that the money could be working and obviously working to contribute to a better world. That's pretty amazing.
So, having tested the first bit of tech, we're going to immediately test the second. We've got our first poll, so if everyone could go onto the Slido website. The question is, are saving and investment decisions have an impact on the planet? How well do you believe you understand this impact? Please vote now. I can still see one or two thumbs going, so I'll just give it a second. Okay, can we see the results? Okay, so a fairly even split actually, but oh, it's getting worse all the time. So most people feeling that they don't understand very well the impact. Some with a little bit of knowledge, and less than a third confident that they've got a good understanding. So let's see if we can improve on that in the course of the next 30 minutes or so. So to our panel then, this is a critical moment in the fight for climate action. Help us understand initially why it's so important.
Well, if you think about where we are actually at the forefront of quite quite a frightening dawn for humanity. As you mentioned in your introduction, we are on track for several degrees of raise to pre-industrial levels. We're seeing water scarcity issues, we're seeing food sovereignty issues. Most of all, we're seeing climate inaction rather than climate action in some places. So I think it's really critical that not only governments but also individuals and corporations take responsibility for the types of progress that we can do if we all pull together.
Jacinta?
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I won't go on because we know that the list is interminable, and every time we open the news we see new things about how we're at this very apocalyptic time and getting to all of these tipping points. I think the one thing I'd add is that we have to look at the role of our money in all of this, and in our case, pensions is one of the biggest pots of money one person will have in the UK, the biggest one that they'll have in terms of making a difference. So it's just knowing, and what this panel is about, of like the impact that we can have in stopping the climate emergency. And if I don't need, we need to convince anyone, and we'll hear talks here at COP26 for the next 2 weeks about how we are all going to take action. But the one thing that I can say is look at your money and what it is doing and ask the right questions. And that is the most powerful thing that you can be doing to tackle the climate emergency, as big as it sounds.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's lots that's been said about this already, but I think it is interesting particularly to look at the extent to which not only are many countries not fully mitigating and reversing the damage, but they're actually expecting to do more coal, to do more oil, not just for the next couple of years, but for decades from where we are now. So the extent of continued growth into some of these harmful areas is actually quite material. And so there is an urgency, there is a tipping point moment that we're all at now.
And you've talked a bit about, clearly we're all here for COP26, not too far away from here. You've got leaders from right across the world meeting, in theory, to sort this out. To what extent can we leave it to governments and to world leaders to answer this question versus people like us making any kind of impact?
I mean, I think it has to be a partnership. I mean, there's absolutely no doubt that the right policy environments, the right legislative targets, the right regulatory environments, these are all conditions that governments can create to allow the changes that need to happen to take place. So it cannot happen without government, without ambitious policy, that's for sure. But I think both in terms of the amount of money that's required to deliver some of these solutions and the cooperation amongst civil society that's required to deliver some of these solutions, it cannot be done by government on its own. There's not enough money, and it also requires, consumers and societies to begin to change the way that they behave, not just from a being told what to do perspective, but from a general recognition that we all need to adopt and adapt different ways of operating as communities. So can't happen without government, can't happen without policy, but it has to have the cooperation of the whole of society, and in the context of what we're talking about here, it needs capital, money to be mobilised and allocated to the right companies doing the right things to help achieve some of those objectives. And that's not just going to come through taxation, it's going to come through investment. And a lot of that can come from us as individuals, which I think we'll talk about more.
Yeah, we'll certainly circle back to that, but I don't want to let governments off the hook just yet. Nick, give us a sense of, there's obviously a lot of frustration around it. I even hear the Queen is getting quite piqued about the situation. Why aren't governments just getting on with it?
Well, as Mark said, there is a serious political imperative here, and very often politics and policy is a reflection of society. And if society is not yet adamant enough, and if society is not demanding enough from government, then government and policies won't be ambitious enough to deliver that change. I think just to add to what Mark said in the previous answer, we've already seen in the UK, in the National Infrastructure Strategy, there's been a specific call on the incentivisation of private capital to deliver the infrastructure that we need for decarbonisation. We've seen that in other G20 countries as well. That's just recognition that governments cannot do this without private capital providing solutions. And what's good about that is it means it does give communities and individuals the firepower to make decisions.
Mark, you've talked a little bit about the scale of investment that's required. Help us understand that a bit better.
Well, I think, there are various estimates, but in broad terms, the amount of capital that is estimated to be required to achieve the Paris Agreement is in the region of $6 trillion. So it's an enormous number. It's a number we can't even really get our heads around, is it? It's an enormous number. But it's very, very significant, the amount of capital that's going to be required to deliver the solutions, not just in terms of energy, but there are lots of other aspects to it as well, which will be required to achieve the Paris targets. So about $6 trillion. And I also think it's important that we don't ignore the progress that has been made. You look at the UK, for example, we have periods where the vast majority of our generation of electricity on a given day is coming from renewable sources. A lot of that has come about because of good government policy, incentivization of companies and investors to build clean energy. So we know that policy can work. Is it enough yet? No, it's not. But we know that private capital working in partnership with the right government policies can move us forward. And that's, if we're going to hit that $6 trillion target, that's what needs to happen.
Where does that need to go? 6 trillion is indeed a ridiculous number. What kind of thing will we be investing in?
So, we do tend to talk a lot about energy in this sector or in this whole debate. So a lot of it does need to go towards transitioning away from fossil fuel-based sources of electricity generation particularly, and also gas. But there's a lot of other areas that we need to think about. It's not just about how we generate energy, it's about how we consume it. An enormous amount of energy gets wasted. So energy efficiency is a really important area that we can have a big impact on and that we need to focus on. How do we decarbonise industry? How do we decarbonise air travel? How do we decarbonise the manufacturing of steel? These are all very, very substantial, very expensive, long-term projects that all go into that calculation, or that $6 trillion calculation.
And Nick, I understand kind of innovation and indeed new solutions are a key part of that as well. Can you give us an example?
Absolutely. Everyone, as Mark said, thinks about the energy transition as being a generation problem, but actually it's across many different pillars, including sustainable land, food and forestry. Where are we going to feed the 8 billion people on planet Earth in 10 years' time? It spans digitization. If we're able to meet digitally rather than travel, we need to invest in R&D across healthcare and education as well. These are all things that are known as sustainable themes that will help to mitigate the climate emergency. We're thinking about this as Foresight in quite a big way. We're launching a fund in January, which is focusing on the energy transition, but not just from an energy perspective. We're coming at it from, yes, there's energy companies in there. There's also going to be sustainable land, sustainable forestry, sustainable food, and everything else that can have a supply chain or a consumption impact.
Okay.
And one of the other biggest challenges we have is around how we store energy. We can generally, with wind and solar, generate enough electricity to service all of our needs broadly. But often the sun doesn't shine at the right time, the wind doesn't blow when you need it. So the ability to store energy at a large scale is also really a critical component, I think, worth highlighting, that will require a lot of investment.
Is there anything that feels especially pressing when it comes to innovation? Is there anything at the front of the queue?
I think decarbonising air travel is clearly going to be very difficult. It's very difficult to see how that's going to happen without major investment and R&D in hydrogen or some other renewable fuel. A huge amount of emissions come daily from that industry. I think the steel and in general the construction industry needs decarbonisation in a massive way. So we're seeing sustainable solutions across the construction and the property sector as well.
Yeah, again, one small example, but real estate generally, so buildings, the built environment, is responsible for about 1/3 of all global carbon emissions. So if we can make buildings more energy efficient, if we can construct them in a less carbon intensive way, then we're going to go a very, very, very long way to reducing carbon emissions and the associated impact. So we focus on that in our sustainable real estate strategy because it's such a massive part of the problem, and we can improve things by directing capital towards companies that are more energy efficient and dealing with some of those challenges.
When most of us think about investing, we get giddy at the idea of the impact it might have on us if we get it right. But I know actually there is another side to that coin. It's the impact that it has on the investee companies, those that ultimately we're investing in. Help us understand that impact, Nick.
Well, money, capital, is the lifeblood of companies. And so if you're a company that needs to invest in R&D, that needs to build and develop sustainable solutions, if you are not properly financed and if you don't have access to capital, you're really going to struggle to run an operating business that's successful and that's delivering those solutions. And it's not just about building more solar farms and more wind farms. It's about investing in companies that are early stage, that are investing in solutions that are not yet apparent. So it can be across the risk spectrum from an investment perspective. It can be early stage innovation-led companies, but it can also be more sustainable and more secure cash flows from real infrastructure assets like solar, wind and hydro.
I've lost my thread here, forgive me for a second.
The other thing I was going to say, I think Jacinda might comment on something as well, but as well as just the pure provision of money, of capital for them to carry out their operations, we think that the extent to which you can engage with these companies as an investor as well and share your priorities and what you care about as an investor can really help shape the direction of that company and what they do. So in the same way that we as when we invest in a company, we're almost voting. We're giving them our capital, we're giving them our vote of confidence. And we're now at a point where a lot of the companies that we invest into, it's now become a dialogue. They recognize that we invest and care about them on a sustainability basis. So they want to understand from us, what do we care about as investors? What's best practice look like? Because companies increasingly recognize, as Nick said, access to capital is existential for a company. And investors are now caring more and more about sustainability. So the way that you engage with those companies as an investor can be as important as the provision of the capital itself.
But also, can I just add also about in terms of pensions, but also every kind of retail investors, and lots of people watching this might be investing through apps on like £10, £50, £100. And there's lots of platforms out there, both in terms of pensions, but also retail investment, on how people can actually showcase their votes, as you were saying, and how they can be able to say how they care about different issues, whether it's on the E of ESG, the S, the G. So it's also about giving more voice and choice to those people. And mainly in terms of pensions, it's about giving that voice to the members of the pensions. So it's for the pensions industry to engage with its members, but also everyone that's watching this, just asking your bank, your pension provider, where is your money invested, and the different topics that you care about. And there's lots of different like fintechs and websites, and even the same like banks and pension providers that are providing that kind of tool for them to be having their say. And that's what we're doing as a campaign. We're telling people that they can have a voice and that they can be voicing their concerns and also the things that they care about, because then the investors will sit at the table and they will have listened, or they will have, I don't know, at least take into account that these people care about specific things. And that's what the movement that we're trying to build is about, that, of people not shying away, as you were saying, because lots of people just don't know that their pension is invested, or think that investment is just for wealthy people who have extra money to be invested. And actually, if you have a bank account, that money is invested in your behalf because the bank is using it. And if you have a pension, that's exactly the same. So it's just asking and not shying away from an issue that can seem tricky, but I'm sure we're trying to show the world that it's not.
Just to reinforce that point, the common misconception is that you need to have an independent financial advisor, you need to have someone who's telling you how to be a custodian of your own assets. But you can make investment decisions with a very small amount of money. Now that there are robo-advisors online, that there's a disintermediated relationship with the more institutional investment base. So with the apps, and you can use £5–10 a month and actually make decisions between different financial products, which are different grades of sustainability. So there is freedom now like there hasn't been before.
I'd like to pick up on a few of the points that were made there, though, because I think for many of us, the idea of investing is a beautiful one, but it's far off in the future. And you guys have talked about £5 here, £10 there, versus the 6 trillion that's required that Mark has described. How much are we beholden to the people who really have the power to invest, the people with the deep pockets who can make a difference? How dependent are we on them making the right choices versus really having any power in our own hands?
Well, the good thing is that they're investing your money, so you have all of the power to direct how it's done, and you can vote with your decisions. So as well as deciding if you're going to invest in an individual company, you can also demand that your pension fund is invested in a sustainable way, or you can choose a fund or a product from a financial perspective that is articulating itself in a way that aptly matches your values. So you do have the power as an individual, and often it's as much as just sending an email or asking a question. I think there's lots of people out there who are invested who are not thinking actively about where that money's going.
Exactly, and if you sum up the amount of money, I mean, in the UK alone, you've got £2.6 trillion invested in pensions, and that's the money that you and I and all of the people in the UK who have a pension are putting every month. So yeah, it might be like, as a member, you might feel that it's a very small decision and that you won't really change the diet, but actually we've seen with the campaign, we've only been around for a year and a half, roughly, and we've moved £800 billion invested in pensions that are already committed to net zero. And we hear from CEOs from the biggest pension funds telling us, like, look, I didn't used to receive any emails. And now people go to our website, use our template, and sometimes as an individual, you might think that you won't change anything with an email, but actually that CEO had never received an email, and he received maybe 50 or 60 or 100. And because of that public pressure and the public pressure of businesses that are also signing up to our campaign, we're getting to move 8 billion, which is a lot of money, but there's 2 trillion still to be committed to net zero.
And I understand the change in legislation around auto-enrolment, that's brought far more people into the pensions world than there were before. Can anyone pick that up for us?
Well, if since 2018 you will be auto-enrolled, you either have to opt out or meet a few other conditions, such as be earning less than £10,000 a year, and that means the vast majority of people do have pensions, and there is a pot of money somewhere that they can influence. And just to reiterate the point that Jacinta made, you know, Mark and I manage portfolios that are investing into funds which are making decisions on companies. I can absolutely tell you that if we received an email from an investor without saying how much was invested, that they had a certain view on a certain type of asset or investment, it would be considered.
And I think, again, to that general point around how does my £100 a month make a difference, it's the same kind of argument around voting in an election, isn't it? It's like, well, my vote doesn't make a difference, it's just one vote. But, you know, you get landslide elections, you get the tide of public opinion changes, and things change. And I think we're seeing that sort of, you know, landslide election happening now, I think, in terms of sustainability and more ESG and sort of impact-focused investing. And the big guys are taking notice. Now, you can take a view on how genuine and how effective their words are going to be, but some of the biggest asset managers in the world, you know, have made very bold claims about how they're going to be changing the way that they invest. And a lot of that will be because they recognise that all these individual £100 a month might go somewhere else if they're on the wrong side of history. And so I think that's a big thing to think about as well.
So it feels like pensions are the big opportunity for most of us to make a difference. We want to run another poll just to get a sense of how well people understand where their pensions are at the moment. So if you can pop back to Slido. And the question this time is, do you know where your pension is invested? So some thumbs are quicker than others, so I'm going to wait. Okay, I think So that's interesting. So 3/4 of us not clear on where our pensions are invested. I might have some bad news for you guys, because we're going to talk a little bit now about where it's likely to be invested. Just before we get to that, Jacinta, you've touched on this, but talk to us a little bit more about how much there is in UK pensions and pensions around the world.
So there's 2.6 trillion invested in UK pensions, and around the world there's $50 trillion across the biggest pensions market. So you talked about 6 trillion for the Paris Agreement. That, if you compare it, it's a lot of money and could be doing amazing stuff if it were aligned to net zero or sustainable investment. So it's not only to scare people, if we're going to talk about that right now, but also to showcase that the scale of the opportunity is massive.
And I'm going to insist that you scare people. Talk to us a little bit about where that money is often invested.
So our money is invested across the whole wide world. So we might have a pension here in the UK, but I'm from Argentina, and I'm sure lots of the money invested through those pensions are in places like that, far away, closer to my home. So it can be in things like tobacco companies, weapons, fossil fuels mainly. We know that from every £1,000 in pensions, £60 are invested in fossil fuels. And that is mainly to make the point that we might all be making decisions to live more sustainably at an individual level, to give up meat, give up flying, changing to a renewable energy provider, but we might be accidental investors in lots of things that we don't agree with. So asking these questions and learning more about this and why the campaign kind of exists is for people not to be investing into things that are undermining all of their other choices that they're doing in the other realms of their lives.
And it's quite a shocking revelation, that. It was certainly shocking to me. How does that happen? How does it happen that you put the money into your pension, you have an assumption that it's broadly going to certainly nowhere terrible, and then you discover that it is funding arms and various other things? Does anyone have a view on how that comes to be?
Up until a few years ago, sustainable investing, ESG, so environmental, social and governance-focused investing, was not mainstream. Many big asset managers have not been forced to answer hard questions about where their money is going. So the pure drivers of investment have been investment returns. And if you're not considering sustainability, if you're not considering the climate imperative in that asset allocation, then it's likely that you'll be invested into somewhere that it does not meet the requirements for achieving the Paris Agreement.
Yeah, and again, I think the objective of most pension funds historically has been to provide you with an income when you retire so that you can live. And most investment managers and fund managers have determined that investing in oil companies is a good way to try and achieve that objective, because oil companies make money. So it's fairly simplistic in a sense as to how that's happened, because they're trying to generate the returns that will deliver on the objective of the pension itself. But as I think it's been said, people are becoming more and more focused on the other impact that their money has, not just the financial return, but the way in which it steers the future of humanity. And I think that is what has changed.
Yeah, and I guess if we think that investments in pensions and in savings, and you'll know more about this than I, but it's the money of the future because you invested and it grows in time. So then if you're investing into something that's kind of far away in the future and that money is shaping the world around you, as you both just said, then it makes no sense to be investing to build and shape a world in which everything will be on fire. Like it doesn't make sense to me. And we've seen like people like Al Gore and like Mark Carney was at our Net Zero Pension Summit, and he did say like sustainable investment is the biggest commercial opportunity of our whole generation, and it's not a value versus values thing anymore, as you said. Maybe before it was not mainstream, but now it just really doesn't make financial sense not to be thinking of the kind of future where we will be collecting that pot of money.
Yeah, encouragingly, I think that it is increasingly risky to ignore sustainability and to ignore the types of companies that are involved in malpractice, because you're also at a financial risk personally from the risks that those companies are exposed to, as well as a global systemic climate risk.
Now, Jacinta, you've talked about how you've helped people put pressure on pension funds and banks and indeed shifted billions of pounds towards more sustainable investments. Can you tell us a bit more about the type of action you encourage?
Yeah, so as a campaign, we have three main focuses. We've got the public campaign, which is all about raising awareness about the issue. As we just saw on the poll, most people don't know where their money is invested or that the money is invested at all. So firstly, it's about raising that awareness, and we do that with things like creating fun films and throwing pensions parties. We did that, is a thing, and it was fun. But also, and getting to mainstream this issue, because before, I mean, pensions, they're not the sexiest thing in the world. People just like fall asleep when you mention pensions. It's not happening, luckily, anymore. And so that's the first bit of the campaign, and it's bumping up that public pressure, and people can go to our website and use a very simple template and write to their pension provider, or if they have a company pension, they can write to their companies. The second part is working with organizations to get them to think about their investments in their sustainability journeys. So we know from research that only 5% of FTSE 100 companies align their pensions investments to the rest of their sustainability commitments, which is a shame because it's a very, very big pot of money, mostly for the biggest companies. So it's about working with these businesses, these NGOs, to sign up to our Green Pensions Charter and commit to working with their trustees, with their pension providers in having a greener pension. And thirdly, and we touched upon this before, is working with the government and with the industry to create change at a macro level and see that systems change. But I think, and we believe at Make My Money Matter, that none of these parts would work with the other ones. So you need the public pressure, you need to show that there is a demand there and that the businesses leveraging their brands want to see this and want their money to be aligned to their values. And then this puts the pressure to get the progress and the successes that we've seen.
Okay. Mark, Jacinta's talked about changing the scheme at large. Is there anything that we can do on an individual basis in addition to that?
Well, I guess, pensions are clearly one area of our individual kind of investment life that we can influence. There are lots of other things that we as individuals might invest in over time that we can make a difference with, be it in the UK, an individual savings account or other savings and investments that sit outside of a pension. Increasingly the distance between the money that we have and where it can be invested is shrinking, and the visibility that we can have as individuals is growing. So if you've got, say you inherit £1,000 from somebody, and you think, I want to invest that in a wind farm, you can do it. You can download an app, you can put your £1,000 in, and you can invest in a fund or a company that is building wind farms. And so it's so much more accessible than it was even 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. It's so much more accessible for individuals to make their own informed decisions about where they want to put their money. And it might not be just about the very long term with a pension. It might be about something more short term. And so I think it's the shrinking of that distance and that accessibility for ordinary investors that has changed a lot and can really help people feel that what they're doing with their money is really tangible and they feel connected to it. And I think that can make a big difference over time.
Do those choices exist with pension money, Nick?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as we've seen, very few people actually know where their pensions are invested. And simply spending a few hours educating yourself about how your pension works in terms of, is there a portal I can go on and actually make some selections myself, a sustainable fund or a ESG-focused fund, or indeed company, that's something that everyone can do right now with their pension. Let's not forget that it's not just about investing. This panel's about how to make your pound matter, and your consumer decisions matter as well. So everything you buy and every service that you procure, you're also making a decision with your money that can be used to influence the subjects that we're talking about.
Now, you've talked earlier about there being more sustainable choice, certainly relative to several years ago. And for anyone who was around earlier, there's a gentleman had a question about greenwashing, which is a term that seems to come up more and more. Is it as simple as choosing a sustainable fund or an ethical fund, or is it more complex than that?
It is definitely more complex than just choosing something that has a windmill on the front cover of the prospectus or whatever you're investing in. I think asking questions and engaging with the company that you're actually trusting to be a custodian of your money is important. Fortunately, we're seeing lots more companies come to market that are focused purely on offering those kinds of solutions, so there's more and more choice all the time, and the competition in that area leads to better and better outcomes, because when there was just one sustainable fund, they could define sustainability themselves. But as we're seeing more options and more demand for these products, we're seeing that you actually have to be quite specific. Is this an impact fund? Is it sustainability focused? Is it using some other definition that you need to define quite clearly? So clearly the advent of more products to market is very important.
Now, the challenges we're facing are global, clearly, and very often, and perhaps unsurprisingly, it's the smaller, poorer countries that are likely to suffer more of the impact. If we are making these sustainable choices with our money, how much of it is getting to those areas?
It's a great question and a really important question. I think one of the great challenges that a lot of the policymakers are trying to grapple with right now is that there's a certain sense of, the developed West pulling the ladder up. We got to emit all this carbon to accelerate our global development, and now we're telling India, don't build any more coal power stations. Now that's a difficult political sort of hot potato to try and deal with. So I think the extent to which we can help catalyse and accelerate capital going towards some more emerging market countries, I think will be really important for achieving the overall global objectives that we're interested in. So certainly from our perspective, we do invest in companies which are active globally, be that hydro assets in South America or solar assets in Africa. There are companies that you can invest into which are very active in a lot of these developing and emerging economies, and the more capital that can go towards those sorts of opportunities, the faster we can all work together to end coal, solar, and other fossil fuel generation sooner. But it will be accelerated by more capital going towards companies like that.
Mark's talks about the West pulling the ladder up for countries that are still emerging. Can you give us an example of a company that is investing in those developing markets?
So, one of the companies that we invest into in our global fund does exactly that. Its business model is very, very specialised, and it develops solar energy in places where there has been a low penetration of renewables, but it also has high demand for power. And so not only are you benefiting the local community in terms of a socio-economic impact, but you're also making a 10-fold times difference in terms of displacing dirty diesel generators rather than displacing natural gas from the grid. So investing in that type of company that does have an outsized impact in emerging economies is really important, and that's part of our screening, and we think about society's impact as well as environmental impact, and it is somewhat cyclical.
So Jacinta, these are investment guys, so naturally they talk about investing in companies. One of the other options is to take your money away from companies. Talk to us a bit about disinvestment, if you like, removing investment.
About divestment. So we think divestment and engagement that you talked about are both sides of the same coin. So engagement and having that conversation as investors with the companies that you're trying to put pressure on or to try to change from the inside only works if you have divestment as a threat, and you know that because presumably you've used it or not. But engagement is very important, because also remember that when you hold shares in a company, that gives you a seat at the table, which means that you get to sit with the people, the company, and then push them, and there's loads of examples, and recently Exxon, for example, they changed 2 directors because of the push of the shareholders. So it does make a change, and to what I was saying before, it's those investors, those shareholders also made those decisions based on their members. So what the people they were investing on behalf of were asking for as well. So it's the whole chain, right? It's you as an individual voicing those concerns, but also letting the provider or the investor know about this, and it's happening more and more now. but also that investor having that conversation and knowing until when they're having that conversation, and knowing that if that company is not willing to be more sustainable or go through a just transition to achieve net zero, for example, that they can take away their money. And that we've seen that also that helps as an example for the rest of the companies that they're invested in.
So we've definitely seen that example with Exxon. Nick, where do you stand on the idea of divestment?
I think it certainly is nuanced. I think that in a capitalist world where there are incentives that make big asset managers and big emitters all dance to the tune of we're doing something together, the very little is going to change. So it's very important that the objectives of the individual do flow through to the objectives of the custodians of the capital and then to the company. I think the point well made at the beginning was that divestment does need to be on the agenda, because if there is no threat that the company will be cut off from capital markets and there's no real threat that they'll have to stop or change what they're doing, then they simply won't change fast enough.
Okay. So we've talked a bit about the choices that exist. I'm going to turn to the audience again now, if you can reach for your phones once more. Interested to know how confident you would feel about making investment decisions around your pension. Oh. So a fairly even split. No one is overconfident, but we've got a relatively even split between confident and not so confident. For those who aren't confident, what kind of help is available? Where can they find reassurance?
Yeah, I think it varies a little bit on your own circumstances, obviously, and we're not here to give anybody advice, but there is an enormous amount of resource available for people wanting to invest their money in particular ways, into particular areas and strategies. There's obviously, again, in most geographies, regulated advice that you can get to help you make decisions as well, and increasingly regulated advisors are becoming required to talk to their clients about sustainable investing. So, depending on what you're looking to achieve and how you're looking to invest, there's lots of different help and advice available. But I think, if you went online and searched for, particular services or particular ways of directing your capital, towards sustainable companies, there's an awful lot of help there, I think, to get you started.
I think that one of the key things, one of the key challenges is just getting familiar with the definitions so you can make informed decisions. So if you understand what sustainability means in terms of investment, if you understand what impact means in terms of investment, if you really know what these terms mean, you'll be much better placed to make decisions around your finances and around the investments, especially when talking to pension funds or even to your when you walk into a bank, you talk to someone or talk to someone online from a self-help desk.
Okay. And what sort of apps or platforms are out there? Where would you suggest someone go if they did want to just begin to educate themselves a little bit and get more familiar?
Yeah, I guess we've got people listening in from lots of different countries, but from a UK perspective, for example, you might look at Hargreaves Lansdown, you might look at AJ Bell. There are different online platforms where you can go and select things that you want to invest into, and often they will curate lists of funds and companies that align with particular objectives. So if you said, right, I'd like to put my money into solar energy, they would have done some research and curated a list of companies that would align with that. So certainly, UK, those would be a couple of platforms, for example, that might help. It'd be different in different countries, but yeah.
Just to add on the pension side of things, that can be tricky and scary. On our website, we've curated lots of different steps that people can take and lots of very good guides that are out there for people to start familiarizing them with the notions, the concepts, and everything related to pensions. And we launched last week our Green Pensions Guide, which has the business case, if you need to make the business case for your employer, but also the different steps and the different stakeholders that you need to engage in your company, because lots of people won't be able to switch companies, so to switch pensions, sorry, they will be with their company pension. So it's not about choosing one ethical fund. Sometimes they do have that within the pension provider that they're with, but it's not the majority of people. So it's more about aligning the default fund to sustainability and to net zero commitments, for example. So on our website, where they can find lots of different, not only information, but also actions that they can take towards this. And on our YouTube, there's lots of films that just present the topic in a really fun and engaging way with lots of comedians and people that support the campaign.
So we've thrown a fair bit of information at our audience so far today. So we're going to go back to the start and ask a question we asked at the beginning, which is, how well do we think we understand the impact? I'm hoping there's at least a slight improvement on the numbers from earlier. So I'll ask you to take your phones out one last time and vote on how well informed you feel you are. Let's see those numbers. Well, it was fairly even before, and it's still fairly even, but I'm going to say more people feel very well informed, and trust that no one quite remembers the numbers from the first time around, so we might get away with that. To close then, guys, I lied actually. There is one more poll question, if I could ask you to keep your phones out. And the final poll question is, do you believe as an individual you have the power to create change and help achieve Goal 3 of COP26, which is about mobilising finance? This really is the acid test. There we go. We'll take that. We'll take that 2/3. Well, listen, thank you, everyone. Thank you for taking part. We will come to audience questions now. Does anyone have a question for our panel?
Hi. When you mentioned that 6 trillion was what we needed to invest in order to reach net zero, what do we stand to lose if we don't?
So I think the 6 trillion is for Paris, right? So for the 1.5 degrees. So I think, again, there's a lot of predictions and forecasts around what's going to happen in all areas of life, all around the globe. If we aren't able to contain rising temperatures globally. So, and I think we see lots of small examples of that with increasing frequency. So, displacement of people, drought, food insecurity, pollution, irreparable environmental damage. So, it covers a huge range of negative outcomes. So again, you can kind of dial up or dial down the sort of catastrophizing, but it looks pretty bad if we're not able to mobilise that capital, if we're not able to deliver against Paris and a host of other areas. It doesn't look good.
If you gave a very conservative estimate, what would it stand to cost us?
What, in pounds and pence? I wouldn't know where to start in terms of putting a value on the potential loss of economic activity and human life potentially.
But would it be safe to say it would be an awful lot more?
It'll be a lot more. It'll do more damage than it will cost.
Yeah, hi there. A question that's come in from, I believe, online. Is that right? Yeah. So, how do sustainable investment returns compare to traditional investment returns? And if they're better, why does traditional investment still exist?
That's a great question. So I think that we're in a changing environment, and I think it is becoming more and more accepted that sustainable investing is outperforming traditional investing. And I think that that's only going to become more and more apparent as the risks of investing into companies that do not have a place in the future economy become more and more pronounced. I think that the academic study over the last sort of 20 years will look very different to what the next 20 years are going to look like in terms of risk return.
And I think as well, when you start to get into the detail of it, it becomes, in a lot of respects, obvious why you might get better returns, because companies which are ignoring a lot of these important sustainability issues are exposing themselves to higher risks. And from an investor's perspective, if I look at company A and company B, and I think one is more risky than the other, then I'm going to take capital and move it to the less risky company. And sustainability risks, environmental risks are becoming more and more obvious, and the impact is becoming higher and higher. So to an extent, it stands to reason that companies that have identified their sustainability impact and are taking steps to deliver positive returns, both financially and against some of those sustainability areas, they will deliver superior financial returns over the long term as well. And again, thinking about sustainability very simplistically, you can't deliver sustainable returns over 30, 40, 50 years if you don't exist as a company. And if you're active in sectors and markets which are damaging the world, there's a good chance your business model will not exist in 20 years' time. And so from an investor's perspective, why would I invest in that company?
Thanks for a great session. Finance, obviously, one of the most kind of universal things that kind of unites us all in some ways. From a maybe campaign perspective, how do we jazz up some of the storytelling and communications and campaigns around finance, which could be leaning on slightly dull for some people?
Well, it's not an easy task, and we're trying to change that. What we would say, and what we are trying to do as a campaign, is bring the topic down to earth and show people how this impacts first in their day-to-day life. What we were saying before, right? Like anyone that has a pension, that is in work and hasn't opted out of that pension, will have a pension pot that is being invested in across the world, right? So it's about finding those human stories, but also I mean, what I found useful working in this campaign, and also working and trying to make people understand, both at employees at companies, friends, family, just thinking that the money that you have now will be invested, like just trying to explain how the whole process works. It's just putting the information out there. Like a lot of what we do as a campaign is just telling people that their money is invested, and we run surveys all the time, and most people don't know that their pension is invested. But when we ask them then, if it were invested, what would you like your pension money to be doing? Most people, like 80% of people, reply that they would like for that money to be doing good for people and planet. So it's about intertwining the narrative about the impact it's having on people, on planet, what you were just saying, how it'll impact on the different societies across the world, but that has to do with the pound, the wallet of that person, and not that like financial sector, macro level thing. But we need more content, we need more films, we need more people to be talking about this. So anyone watching and everyone here today, just if you have to take anything after this, it's just like talk about this and go and see what your pension money is doing behind your back.
I think some of it is probably about storytelling, you know, and it is about bringing it to life for people, because especially with a pension, you know, you're probably not going to be drawing any of those benefits for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, but the money you're putting into it is being invested right now, you know, so you might not be benefiting from it for 30, 40 years, but, you know, we get a lot of money that comes into our funds which are coming out of pensions, and we are investing them into wind farms, solar farms, sustainable buildings now. So I think it's about telling that story and bridging that gap and making people realize that just because the benefits are 40 years away, the impact is now.
So we are almost out of time. I would first like to thank our panel. So thank you for... I feel like I understand this world, and I've definitely still learned something today. So there's a long way for me to go. I should put my feedback on the board. I think in summary, the key message is there's probably more impact that we can all have than we realise, particularly through our pension pot. Whether we engage with it or not, it will be invested, and if we don't engage with it, it might well be invested in ways and in sectors that aren't consistent with our values. Without being an investment professional, without being an investment manager, you can actually start to make some choices that better align your assets with your values and really make an impact that is very much required. The only way we get anywhere near that 6 trillion is not by relying on governments, but it's through our personal choices. I hope that's been useful. I hope it's been interesting. Thank you for joining us, and see you soon.
Thank you all very, very much. It's fantastic to end such a busy first day with great solution. So we all know what we're going to be doing this evening. Yeah, that wraps up our sessions for the day. But don't go home yet, because we have a whole evening agenda waiting for you. I'm happy to introduce this evening's workshop, which is running from 7 until 8 tonight, Springwise and Reset, Innovation at the Forefront of Climate Action. In this workshop, we have to ask the question, how can innovation accelerate action to deliver bold climate goals? And who are the young innovators shaping the future? This workshop will spotlight the young innovators at the forefront of change and showcase how innovation can drive transformational outcomes. Hosted by the global innovation intelligence platform Springwise in collaboration with the next generation strategy consultancy, Reset, both certified B Corps and members of 1% for the Planet. Thank you so much for being here tonight. And now let's all go to work with our money. Thank you.